If you can build it here, you can build it anywhere.
I think I'm just going to say that if you don't like something, change it.
Okay, if I build one on wheels, what are my hurdles? If I build one without wheels, what are my hurdles? What's local code requirement going to drive me towards?
You could be 60 years old and you want to move your parents into an accessory dwelling unit. They have to go over the same hurdles as a 20-year-old that doesn't want to have the lifestyle.
What we need are safe, secure places that someone can actually afford to live inside of.
And this is a recurring theme of we're not going to let you do it.
You want a different lifestyle, it's not a tiny house podcast. I've seen a number of horrible articles at this point for the people that are involved in it where they sell their house, they do whatever, they're going to go tiny, they're going to go off grid, they're going to do whatever, and then they pour their financial savings, everything that they can into this future and this desired lifestyle, and then they find out, oh shit, I poured $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, everything I had into it, and then like an inspector comes through or some level of regulation and authority steps in, and they go, well, you can't do this, and then they go, why? I saw it on HGTV. I saw it on whatever. And we're like, well, you saw it on HGTV in Brazil. Right. You saw it in Mexico or wherever you saw it. And so helping people not do that and then fail is really important to kind of what this cause is about and that's why we go, not a tiny house. These aren't on wheels.
Well, and my response to that would be that you don't need to be a design professional to figure all this stuff out, but you have to have a regulatory system that is what we call city government or county government, that is inclusive and that is looking for solutions and not just hurdles.
Right.
Because the biggest problem that we have is you ask a simple question and they give you 5 hurdles. They don't say, here's how you jump the hurdles.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think people are the most frustrated about anything that they try to do today is they get hurdles. And then they say, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And your building code official says, I can't tell you what to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. But they don't give you a path.
There's no guidance.
No, there's no guidance. And they can't because they're a government. Sure. They're not a design professional. So the way their constitutions are written is the building department can't tell you what your solutions are. You have to find somebody to help you with the solutions. But they also don't say, oh, but here's the 5 probable solutions.
Right.
This
is the direction you could head
in. And it's, that's been one of the things that frustrates me the most.
Yeah.
I've been involved in architecture for 30 years.
Right.
So I've done this a few times. And I've volunteered all of my volunteer time in the city government, planning, zoning, right. The building code boards, all of that. So I've been on both sides of the chair. And the thing that frustrates me the most with city governments is they're not solution based. They tend to be hurdle based.
Right.
So now they're getting more progressive, but it's the private sector that has to force the government sector to be more progressive.
Okay, how do you force that?
Well, first of all, you've got to have educated planners in planning firms someplace that has some sort of educational authority to go into a planning commission and say, it's time for you to update all of this because this is ridiculous. This is not how we practice our craft anymore. So they have to redo their comprehensive plans. They have to rewrite their regulations. They have to do all of that stuff, but you have to coax the city into doing it.
Right. What's their motivation and what's their benefit? And
the
right?
master plan is what updated every 5 years in
it should be.
I think it's like every 5 years is
what
they said. And is that like a third party that does that, or is that something that's I think planning and zoning is kind of involved somehow, that commission, or at least the approval process.
Well,
you part of that, but who does the actual groundwork? Because it's pages and pages of maps and documentation and where we are.
It's almost never going to be the commission itself because the commission is a volunteer commission and they don't do it professionally.
Yeah.
And so they don't know exactly what they're looking at.
Right.
So it is generally the city staff that comes and says, it's time for us to update and we need to go out and hire an
consultant
outside firm.
or
Yep. To come in and rewrite our regulations and look at our zoning maps and look at the way we're doing things. And then how does what we do today in zoning transfer to how we're going to adjust what we have been doing in zoning? Because zoning changes. So, for example, we were talking about tiny homes just a moment ago.
Right.
And we talked about how cities aren't prepared for tiny homes. They don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to categorize them. They don't know what zoning block they need to go into. They don't know what to set them
So it's
beside.
because they're not defined, they don't know which box that fits inside of.
Correct.
But you can't just, let's say, for a tiny home that's on wheels, doesn't that just squarely fall inside the RV or RV park guidelines?
That's the easiest place to put them, but that isn't always the best place to put
That's
them.
not where people want them. People want them in
That's
their
correct.
backyards. They want it on their 5 acres,
Yep.
and none of those are allowed.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so what we need to do is to go in and look at a different zoning designation. For example, one of the thoughts I had a long time ago was, why can't I buy 35 acres and just set up a tiny home district?
Right.
And just say this is now a new zoning designation.
THD.
Yep, tiny
Done
home
deal.
district.
But
and I still have setbacks. I still have regulations. I still know, but then it comes into, is it truly mobile? And if it is, then how does it come and go? And where are all the support services? And do you own the lot? Or are you renting space? So then how does that not fall back into an RV park designation?
Or mobile home
or
park.
mobile home.
Or mobile home park.
Yeah.
Yep.
Either of those
So
two.
that I think that's was always funny. Is like you have a mobile home that never moves, and why is it still called a mobile home?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
As soon as the axles and wheels come off of it, right? So I know a guy who made millions of dollars in his career and then sold his business for millions more, literally going to mobile home parks and buying tires and axles off of trailer parks that were on blocks, bringing them back to the factory to sell them because they'd only made it one trip and they were never going to get used again. They were just behind the skirting because skirting is usually a regulation that the city wants. Yeah. So they go, oh, you got to skirt it. So now you're covering up something that's mechanically still sound. So this dude went in, and I'm talking millions of dollars, like not tens, but 30, 40, whatever it was. 50.
Those are tens, but okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like not 10 million. I'm saying like
More than 10 million.
increments of 10 million.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a lot of juice. Like that's a lot of money just to go and
Hey man, 10 million isn't what it used to be.
I know, but it still sounds cool.
It is to
right?
me.
yeah, exactly.
Pennies. 10 million pennies.
We're talking with Lester. Is it Limon or
Limon.
Limon.
Yes.
Okay.
There's
So
an accent mark on the O.
well,
Yes.
I'm
Limon.
sorry, but I like to make sure that I'm at least asking the question instead of assuming, right?
Sure. Listen, the way I live in Colorado, Limon is pretty popular.
And they said that, and I always called it Limon, and people were like, "No, it's Limon," and I'm like, "Dude, it doesn't matter."
It's how it's spelled, buddy.
Yeah. Architecture. I mean, that's kind of your wheelhouse, and so
Architecture and community development.
right, and so you're inside of Canyon City, Colorado.
Yes, my company is P3 Communities. Okay. You can find me on the web.
Back to
Keep
something earlier. So you said, why can't I just buy 35 acres and do my own tiny home community? Can't you effectively already do that if you do a PUD,
That's
planned unit
correct.
development? So you told us previously in some meetings that with a PUD, you basically create your own zoning or your own rules within that property.
Yes.
So could you, in theory, create that? And I know there's still engineering and infrastructure that has to go into place, but you could kind of use current regulations to do that.
Absolutely. It's not even in theory. I mean, that's exactly how we would do it. So what we would do is buy 35 acres someplace.
Or 4,
Or-
because minimum's 3 in Florence. I think.
Sure. But it depends on how big your community wants to be,
Yeah.
right? How big your community are you building? And then we do a planned unit development, a PUD, and you are in charge of your own development guide. So you're the one that basically writes all of the regulations for those 35 acres. You're the one that says, this is how far they have to be spaced apart. This is what they have to look like. They have to be on real foundations, or they have to use these materials or these colors, or, whatever regulations that you currently have to deal with at the city level, you're basically doing the exact same thing, but on your property.
But there are still no guarantees because you still have to take your PUD plan to planning and zoning for approval, correct?
Yes. Well, yes and no. So the PUD process is this. What you do is you buy your piece of property. You lay out all of your roads, all of your infrastructure, all the engineering, all the architecture, and then you develop a guide, and you work with city government to understand, with city staff to make sure that you're not doing something weird and crazy and stupid, and everything's going to catch on fire and we're all going to burn down.
Got it.
So
safety's number one.
Oh yeah,
But on
absolutely.
a safety, not an emotional
Nope.
standard, right?
Nope,
So
that's
it's like I don't like the color you picked
No.
for that siding that you want to have in your PUD. It
Yeah.
has to be. Do you meet this safety regulation? This something other regulation?
Right. So there are two. There's health, safety, and welfare, which you don't want to pack everybody in like sardines, and then somebody catches on fire and burns the whole neighborhood down.
This ain't the
Okay.
Navy.
So there's health, safety, and welfare, and then there are what we call bulk regulations.
Okay.
And bulk regulations are what we generally work with planning and zoning now. So if I bought a house lot and I want to put a house on it, I can't fill it to the four corners with house.
Yeah, those are your setbacks.
Right. Yep.
Minimum square footages.
Yep.
And
And
And the
height-
percentages of
I know.
build, right? You can usually do 40 to 50% of your lot can be built into your structure, depending on how it's listed.
And what zoning?
Yeah, yeah.
It
and your
depends on zoning.
Yeah, yeah. So that's just one basic example. You can go, okay, I have a 10,000 square foot lot. You can't probably build more than 4,000 square foot structure on 10,000. That's 40%.
Yeah, you're generally 25 to 30%.
right.
But
But I know they have a
your lot
upper
coverage
end on it. Yeah.
But that's lot coverage for the house. So for example, the last one I wrote for the Scholastica development
Right.
in Canyon,
Right.
and I wrote the development guide on that. And so I kept it generally in the same size as the neighborhood around it. So we're single family residential on our north lots. And I didn't want it to be 3 stories. I only wanted it to be 2 stories. So I'm trying to fit into the character of the neighborhood so that, those houses look normal on that street. And so, but we also included the ADUs in that development so that basically you could have 13 single family houses, but then you could also have 13 more ADUs on the same properties.
Right, because one principal dwelling is going to get, or one principal structure is going to get one accessory ADU
Correct.
unit per the city code.
Right.
They allow one per one.
now,
So
could you overwrite? Okay, sorry to bring it back to like Florence. Can you overwrite? I think the answer is yes, but can you overwrite the city doesn't allow ADUs, but in my PUD I'm allowed ADUs?
That's correct.
Right.
That's
okay.
correct.
Just want to.
And so that's where we start to talk about more progressive ideas in planning and zoning, because those things come out, and if the city hasn't kept up with it or they don't have a progressive planning department, then you tend to not get those features, and so that's when you have to rewrite.
But this service that you provide costs money, right? So to do
My
PUD,
service?
Yeah.
services you provide.
I hope.
Yeah.
So
ideally.
the PUD, the guide, and the actual PUD that costs money.
Correct.
So in the earlier podcast, we discussed how water moves or money moves water.
Yeah.
In case of floodways and
FEMA,
and
for
FEMA, whatever.
surveys
So
and
as long
stuff.
as you pay for the survey, the water turns out you weren't in a floodway or a floodplain. In this case, money once again moves regulations. Because
It
if you
creates-
have the
it does.
finances to buy the larger piece of land, you have the finances to hire all the experts to create a PUD. That gives you the ability to change the rules. That if you were anybody else in the community just showing up at a meeting going, "This is a bad rule, let's change it," you might not have that power.
I think that's 100% true, but I think it's always been 100% true. Wealth is the generator of everything in America, and
in a capitalistic society.
It's capitalism
right?
after all, yeah.
Yeah. Which
yeah.
is
So the more money you
which
have,
is
the more
noticeable.
power you have, the more things that you can do, because the more resources you can gather, and I get that.
Sure.
But that's why I think that it should be city staff's role to find solutions. not to just identify roadblocks,
Right.
because people don't always have those resources.
Yeah.
And when you don't have those resources, then you tend to get stuck. And they say, man, you just can't do it.
Yep.
And then
Not my
they say,
problem.
well, I can't afford to hire an architect or a planner or anyone else, so I don't know what else to do.
Right. And then you're dead in the water, and you're back to the soup line, so to speak, or you got to go back to work, and you got to get more money put back together, and then construction takes longer. You don't even know if you did it right the first time anyway, because the way that your construction could be put together. If you're
Well, and that's the principal reason that I am in the size of community I am.
right.
And I've always been in communities this size, and I've always practiced in communities of this size, because these guys are left out to dry, and they don't have the resources that Denver has or Colorado Springs have, and they need somebody that understands the process and can help them at a reasonable level.
You have to know the
Yeah.
pain. You have to have at some point experienced the pain in order to want the solution bad enough.
Right.
Otherwise, and that's I was talking with somebody about it recently, and I said, well, no offense to city staff, any of the city's staffs that could listen anywhere, but when your livelihood isn't on the line, you tend not to care as much as the person whose is,
Yep.
right? So I care a hell of a lot more about my project than you probably do, because you're going to have a job Monday through Friday. 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. I'm out here working 7 days a week trying to get a house built, right? And so we have different feelings on it. I think for me, it's when will you guys as humans empathize with the real problem and understand that we are trying to create solutions, and this is the only one that was actually on the table, because I can't just go get a bigger loan. I can't just go get another house. I can't just go do these things. It doesn't work like that for everyone in our society.
Yep.
You have to create solutions and avenues for people to take instead of just roadblocks.
You didn't know you just didn't work hard enough, Wyatt?
Oh, jeez. Right. Yeah. Right. You're right, man. I was just looking for a layup.
Yeah.
But this all brings me back to a basic question, right? When we talk about it, we spoke with a civil engineer earlier, and everybody's getting an understanding of a contractor, and everybody knows what a tile setter does, right?
Right.
But there's a question on the board behind me, and it just says, what is architecture? What does an architect do? Where do you fall in line, and who do you work with the closest? Who do you see on the two ends of your day the most? Those are my questions, so that people go, this is the order where if I were going to contact an architect, I would do it first, third, second. Where would I kind of do that?
Sure.
Yeah, give me a little bit of where it works ideally
Okay.
for you.
Well, you had two questions.
Yeah,
and they're completely different questions.
Right.
Okay. So first one is, what is architecture? Yeah. Architecture is you walk out your front door and open your eyes, and that's everything that you see.
That's built.
Yeah. Built
Right.
environment.
Yep.
The built environment is architecture. Now, what does an architect do, and where does he fall? Where does he or she fall in the order? So the traditional relationship is owner, architect, contractor. Okay? So your contractual relationship whenever you build something, especially in commercial construction, is you're the owner and you have a contract with your contractor, but all communication goes through the architect.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So you and I, as owner architect, have an agreement, and GC and owner have an agreement. I don't have an agreement with the contractor, but my job is to make sure that whatever the contractor does is something that you wanted him to do. Okay? So
Where does the
that's the
civil
contractual
engineer?
relationship.
Where does the civil engineer fall into this order? And people like a surveyor.
Sure. So typically, in a very typical model, especially in commercial construction,
Sure.
you're going to come to me and you're going to say, I want to build this.
I want a PUD.
Yeah, well, you could do that,
That's
but
what I
you
want.
don't need me to do the PUD. I can, but you can also get a planning firm to do that.
Okay.
So you want to build something,
Okay.
all right? You want to build a structure, so we need to design a structure. So you're going to come to me and say, I don't know anything about it, but I want to build an apartment building. And I say, okay. I would then interview you to define the scope of work. How many apartments? How big? Where is it? Do you have property already? Is the property ready to go? If not, I need you to call a surveyor and get the boundaries surveyed. I need a civil engineer or a geotechnical engineer to go out and do soils tests so I can, our consulting engineers can begin to design footings and foundations and structures and all of that kind of stuff, right? So, and then typically the owner or the architect would write a contract such that not only will the architect be compensated for all the work he has to do, but then he will go out and get fee proposals from consulting engineers. And my consulting engineers are going to be electrical, mechanical, and structural. Those are the 3 engineering disciplines that I would go out and hire on your behalf. You already know how much they're going to cost because we've already got fee proposals from them. You know how much that's going to be as owners.
And that's based on a drawing that you've provided or a scope that you've given them.
Usually.
It's about this big of a project. It's a 4-unit apartment building, 2 stories. What's it going to take for you to do the engineering on it from an electrical standpoint?
Exactly.
And a mechanical. So that's going to be your HVAC systems and stuff in a home, right?
And then, yes, HVAC, plumbing. And then civil engineer will design all the drainage. So whether we've got underground stormwater or whether we've got surface stormwater. And so those disciplines are in charge. Architects got to start out the gate faster because they can't do anything until I give them a set of plans or a preliminary set of plans. Because I go preliminary design, design development, construction documentation, bidding or negotiations, and then construction observation. Did I say? I meant construction documentation. That was my third one.
Yeah. That's
and then construction observation. Yeah. So those are the 5 things that I do for the owner.
Yep.
That's what I'm being paid to do.
And
that's commercial and residential. Or
residential is really a lot simpler because it's not until the house gets to be 5,000 square feet or bigger, or whether it becomes bigger than a duplex. Then those don't actually have to go through architecture.
Okay.
You have to have somebody design footings and foundations and beams and that kind of stuff, but an architect is not allowed by law to do those things in the state of Colorado or in most states.
So what if I have a crazy house design that I have in my head? You can make that a reality. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, if it's crazy, you're probably going to need somebody like me. Because otherwise, the GC can just do it. I mean, if you just want a box, GC can build boxes all day.
White's over there dancing.
It wasn't like a real dance. It was just me.
It's like I can build a box, but I don't want a box. I want weird angles and walls of glass, and that's
gonna come with you, and that's gonna come with a structural, making sure that the building's not gonna fall apart in the wind. It's gonna make sure it has the right wind loads, and snow loads, and all that.
Absolutely,
all the fun stuff that goes into it, right?
A typical residential project that I get. They're basically looking for a floor plan, and they probably already found one on the internet, but they want to make some changes. So I have to redraw everything, and then I still have to go to an engineer and say, okay, I need footings and foundations.
Right.
And then the GC does everything else. Oh, headers. We're going to have beams and headers, and the civil or structural will do those. And trusses are usually done by truss manufacturers, so all that engineering comes from truss manufacturers.
Right. Okay.
So there's very little other than me drawing the floor plan, making the changes that you want, and then showing the 4 exterior elevations. That's basically all that I do on projects like that.
Cool.
Okay.
And then
on smaller ones.
Yeah, the smaller ones. Then when you talk like construction observation, that's going to be you going in and walking it with like a GC to go, this is done or not done according to the print that I provided for you.
That's correct.
Yeah. So you're going like that's your oversight.
Usually every 2 weeks we have a site project meeting. Owner, contractor, subcontractors, architect, sometimes engineers, depending on what's being erected.
So I'm just picturing those stock photos you have on the internet on almost every website with everybody with the hard
Suits
hat
and hard
on,
hats, dude.
looking at a blueprint, pointing. Like, that's it.
Suits and hard hats.
That's
so you can just picture that. That's
100%.
Exactly it.
That's 100%.
So just wanted to make sure I'm picturing the right thing.
And mine is a nice pretty white shiny helmet, and everybody else's is beat to hell. You know.
Yeah.
So then
You take it
excavator
out
dudes
of
are-
a cloth sleeve, you keep it in, and it's got like a little box for it.
Yeah.
I remember
yeah.
the first time I saw one of them that looked like a cowboy hat, and I was like, "That's got to be one of the coolest things I've ever." It was a hard hat, cowboy hat.
Yeah, everybody in
And I-
Texas has those.
Yeah. I don't know why I thought it was cool, but I did. Right. And so that helps us. Can you circle back to one thing that
Sure.
you'd said, where if we're just building a box, architect isn't necessarily a requisite. It was a square footage that you had said.
5,000 is
Anything
usually
sub 5,000, the contractor generally deals with.
Yeah, and I've seen them go in and get permits on 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with single line drawings of this is the floor plan.
Yeah. So I mean, it can get super basic on smaller projects.
Anybody can be a house designer. Anybody. That's why they sell all the plans on the internet.
Yeah.
Because generally they are not, they're not regulated.
And
not
they're not even
the
required.
plans anyway.
Right.
The only thing that's
So if I
that
buy
they-
one on the internet, I can just build that.
Yeah. All you have to do is have your structural or civil engineer design your footings and foundations
Okay.
based on where you are.
And your geo that comes back.
Yep. So that's it.
So it still goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Where you have to know what it's going on so that they can figure out how much compaction you have in your ground. So you can go, well, this house is going to weigh
Bearing
X
pressure.
amount and your bearing pressure, right? So it's tiny houses are super small and super lightweight, right?
Can be.
And they, well, right, of course they can be. They could be super heavy too, I guess, in that same respect, right? But when we're talking about what the actual structure itself, and so the name of the podcast, I don't even know if we told you about this or if you've listened, right? It's called It's Not a Tiny House Podcast, right? So This is a podcast about how to actually create something, because the working definition of a tiny house is on wheels.
Right.
What we're creating is not on wheels. What we are creating is definitely less than 5,000 square feet. What we're creating is something that is an affordable, smaller footprint solution. And you've been there and you kind of see that now. And so where we're kind of following all of this stuff through, it's still a really good idea to have an architect work on your project, because you helped us with things that were not necessarily the building architecture.
Right.
You helped us with the site plan.
Yep.
You helped us with the parking plan. And so
Landscape plan.
and all the
part of that,
landscaping
yeah.
stuff. And so when you walk out, I mean, I know that I kind of steered it earlier, but when you walk out your front door and it's everything that you see, and I was like, everything that you built. I should have had it more like with a inflection.
No, I used the term built environment.
Got it. Yeah.
Because it's not. I mean, I built it, and we're talking about container homes in some instances, and I didn't build a container home, and I don't know how to build a container.
Sure.
But once it's in the landscape, it's part of the built environment.
Yeah.
And so, and then anytime you're outside the norm of anything, really, once you start inventing something, creation is the hardest thing to do. Creation is absolutely the hardest thing to do. If you came to me and said, I need a 4,000 square foot home, and I said, well, what are you thinking about? And you said, surprise me.
Right.
That's
I'm coming to you with pages and pages of sketches, ideas.
no. But
That's what I'm doing.
But if you said surprise me, then my canvas is wide open, and creation is the hardest thing.
It is.
Sometimes building inside an envelope or inside an idea is actually easier. You have constraints. You know where you can't go and where you can go.
Sure. And it makes you really flex it too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and in some cases, yes, absolutely, because now you do have constraints, and that's actually kind of harder. So I guess it depends on where you're comfortable. I mean, do you want true creation? And then when you do true creation, so for example, let's say you're in your case putting up container homes, but I want to stack 4 of them.
Got it.
I want these things. I know they'll take their own load.
Yeah.
So, but I have to have somebody prove it with math, right? But I want to stack 4 of them. Do you think that any municipality in a 100-mile radius is going to say, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea"? Because they're going to go, I don't know. I don't know anything about this. And so you have to. So you have to prove it.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so that's the hard part about creation.
And so with that, like,
I have the problem. So my first career is like software development, web design, that kind of stuff. And we regularly get people and customers go, I want Facebook, but not Facebook. all right, there'll be $1 billion,
Yeah.
and it'll take about 15, 20 years. Now, if you want to narrow that scope a little bit,
Yep.
we can
We
talk
can help
about
you.
some real numbers
Right.
and like
Yeah.
some actual
Yeah.
real time frames.
You were only
Yeah,
going to charge $1 billion?
Yeah, that's it.
Bargain.
Bargain.
You wanna do rent
I
to
think I said
own?
like 100 million at that point because that was years ago, right?
Sure.
So it was like $100 million, and it'll take a decade.
Yeah.
Because that's what it takes
Yeah.
to build something like Facebook.
Yeah, creation.
Now tell me something more specific. It's like, okay, this is my niche market, or this is what I want. It becomes easier because you actually have some guidance instead
some
of create
guidelines.
something.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of what we were talking about with working with like a city and them just saying no. And it's like, all we're talking about is it would be faster and easier if you just handed me a slip of paper that said there's an arrow and you could go that direction if you chose to. Like, we're not talking about even a personal opinion. I'm saying when we ask a question, like, hey, where do I go from here? And it's a sheet of paper. It's super helpful, and it would work a lot with people. If they said, why can't I have a house this size? Why has it have to be this? Here are some reference guides. You need to go there so you can then steer yourself from there. But they don't even do that.
Well, and we did a project that had what they call a PDD, a Planned Development District, which is different than a PUD.
Okay.
But they hadn't done a PDD in 20 years.
Okay.
I mean, literally, they had to take it out of the drawer and blow the dust off of it.
Yeah, they're doing
and
that.
say, do your best.
Yeah.
And so we had to distill this. I mean, my first thing was basically what you're talking about, and that is I need a flow chart to go through all of these
Yeah.
regulations and figure out where I want to be at the end.
Right.
And if I make this choice, it takes me in these directions. If I make this one, it takes me in these directions. I literally had to do that even for my client to understand what the hell we needed to do.
Right. Like, what's the course of action here? And so we did it backwards. We just built a house and then said, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Right. And we've talked with everybody about how we've done it in reverse.
Right.
That's why now we're here instead of doing this before we built a structure, because we just built a structure and we're like, okay,
Now
now it's
what?
our problem. and how do we get here?
Well,
again?
but again, invention is the hardest thing because you don't know what to do. And that's where the design profession will help you.
Yeah.
You come to the design professionals and say, I don't know what to do. And I may not know what to do either, but it's my job to then figure it out. And it's my job to keep you guys out of trouble. It's my job to keep you on track. It's my job to make sure you see where the solutions are, where the hurdles are, how we're going to get through them, how we're going to get past it. I speak the language. So I'm the guy that goes in front of the commissions and I explain to volunteer commissioners in most cases
Right.
what it is we're doing.
Which at
because
that point-
they don't know either.
Well, that's the thing. At
Yeah.
that point, you're hoping that they know what you're talking about, because if they're not a professional inside of the building, either trades or design or anything, you might be using vernacular that impresses them, but they still don't know what
They
the
still
hell
don't
you're
know,
talking
yeah,
about. You're
yeah.
like, okay, PDD, got it.
Follow us, like us, share, subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, or wherever you consume your podcast.